This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two pretty alright people that I know. Paul Jasley.
Hello.
And Nick White.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm super excited to talk about the thing we talk about every single week. So let me get that chat started by asking the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Paul.
I've been doing all right, Mike. I've been trying to do this thing where if I'm reading comics, I try to stay up on my weekly, floppies, which can be a hassle sometimes, but I'm also making sure I make time to do a lot of binge reading on my tablet, catch up on my digital stuff, on my Hoopla books and all that. So I tried to do that this week. I had a pretty sizable stack of comics waiting for me this week at the comic shop. And the one thing that I read this week that I kind of wanted to talk about was the first issue of the Female Furies miniseries that DC is doing.
Cool.
Female Furies #1. Written by Cecil Castellucci, art by Adriana Mello. So this book focuses on part of the Kirby Fourth World mythology, the Female Furies, which is a group of women soldiers. Big Barda's probably the most well-known member. But they're led by Granny Goodness. And this book is kind of like the origin story of how they came together. And what's interesting is a lot of the book is told in flashbacks. So you get the introduction to how Granny Goodness became the charge of the orphanage there on Apocalypse, training Big Barda, training Scott Free. And what's interesting about the book, or maybe my hang up with it, is that the characterization between Granny Goodness, Darkseid, Desaad, the other people on Apocalypse feels off to me, because the main thrust of this issue is Darkseid and his male compatriots don't think the Female Furies are as strong or as capable as the male soldiers on Apocalypse. So it's about, misogyny, gender inequality. It's all important stuff. And I think those are topics that should be addressed in comics. Like I don't have an issue with that. I think it's well handled by the story, but in order for that story to work, you kind of have to change those characters in a way that didn't work for me, especially Darkseid.
Okay.
There's a moment in the story, and I don't want to give away too much, but there's a moment in the story where, basically it is a sort of a sexual situation between Darkseid and Granny Goodness, where he's using his authority to pressure into a situation. And like, when I read Kirby's New God stuff, Darkseid is always behind the scenes, master manipulator, doesn't really get too hands-on, not to pun not intended, but but it didn't work for me because so Darkseid didn't really quite work in the story for me. And like a character like Desaad, who in the Kirby stuff is like hiding in the shadows. He's not very assertive. In this story, he's like making fun of Granny Goodness a lot. He's very vocal, and it didn't quite click for me. But I think there's an interesting story to be told. If it's the origin story for this group, all that could change over time. I think that's the story. So,
gotcha.
I don't know. I like the artwork a lot. I think Mello's artwork, it reminded me of Kevin Maguire at moments, the facial expressions and sort of the clean lines. So I really enjoyed that. I think this is a book that's going to be, I'll read it when it's collected in trade, maybe not buy it month to month. But so, in terms of my binge reading, I read a big chunk of the Judge Dredd Complete Case Files #1. This collects the early Dredd stories from 2000 AD, issues 2 through about 60, so about a year's worth of Dredd stories. Wow. And this stuff is great. It's great. Because I first started reading Dredd with the Complete Case Files #5, which is like 5 years down the road. It's interesting to go back and read the early stuff because it's so different. They're not quite sure what Judge Dredd is going to be. It's like a parody of Dirty Harry in a way, those like American like action cop movies from the 70s with a sci-fi twist. And like Dredd isn't quite defined as a character. So the stories are like kind of like all over the place in terms of tone and content, but they're little things that will later on become part of the Dredd mythology. Like very early in the volume, you get the introduction of Dredd's brother Rico, and Rico's a corrupt cop who spent 20 years on Titan, which is the moon where they send corrupt cops to work in a prison like slave labor camp. So that's all very important Dredd stuff that'll come back and be a big part of the story later, like decades down the road. So it's interesting to see it right away. But it's really fun stuff. The thing is, like, they're all like 6 to 8 page stories. You can read a ton of them in a row. Most of them are like standalone stories or maybe like two-parters, but they all seem to run together if you read a lot of them back to back, which My favorite story, though, is one where Dredd discovers there's an underground illegal comic book ring where somebody is supplying old comic books and selling them to kids under the table. And there's a moment where Judge Dredd is like on his motorcycle, the lawgiver, and he's like, selling comics to kids is one of the worst crimes there is. The comics are so exciting, they can't get enough, and the price of them just keeps going up and up. I'm like, oh my God, that's so great. He predicted our future.
I'm glad to hear Diamond finally gets its due.
And then, like, of course, the twist at the end is like they go back to police headquarters after he breaks up the ring, and like they're looking at the comics that they have on the data files. And it's like, oh, no wonder these comics are so expensive. They're old issues of that famous 20th century comic, 2000 AD. They're great. Kids love them. Like, it's really great. Oh, God, such a fun story. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. See, this is just more encouragement to read Judge Dredd. It's just a fun, wacky time, guys.
Exactly.
Nick, how about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Things have been fine. I feel like a broken record, but it's snowing again like crazy over here in West Michigan. What do you want? I guess that's how it is. Beyond that, I've been drowning in the world that is Kingdom Hearts 3, I guess.
Oh, Nick, no.
I've been watching too many people playing it like online, and then Jordan and I hung out last night, and he got Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's just interesting to watch him play it because he actually reads all of the instructions and pays attention to what you're supposed to do instead of skipping all of it and then wondering 2 hours later why you're struggling. Here's looking at you, YouTube Let's Players making more money than me. Suck it. Who's the winner now? Let's not get into that. Here are some things I read to deflect from that conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I read Exo Manowar 20 and 21. For anyone who's paying attention, yes, this is a few months behind. Ever since I heard that Matt Kint was basically going to be getting off this book around 27 or 28, I was like, well, I kind of got to make this last. These issues are, they have Juan Jose Reap on pencils, and it really has to do with the fallout from, I think, what would technically be the first volume of Divinity. For those who forgot, in Divinity, we have the USSR cosmonaut, goes into space, comes back, forever changed due to cosmic encounters, blah, 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 ends up with godlike powers. And we kind of forget that when he comes back, he ends up basically creating a cult around his, God, his, the fact that he's a deity. And it basically becomes this group called the Brothers of the Bomb.
Oh, boy. And
we've had small encounters with them in the past, but now we're seeing what happens when, like, the cult leader, like, leaves the cult and the cult decides it still wants to keep doing its thing. And so we've got some of that going on. It's fun. It's interesting. It feels very episodic, but we're getting the leader of Gate, whose name I can't remember, but she's really awesome, and it's nice to see her again, even though clearly I can't remember her name. Beyond that, I also read Umbrella Academy Volume 1, Apocalypse Suite. For those who follow the top of my pull list document, top of my pile document on Patreon, I mentioned that I was planning to read this book, and I did, so there you go. Do you want me to redo that?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
With less groans, please.
Yeah, sorry. I forget all of these stupid things. So for those who follow Top of My Pull, the weekly document that we put out over on Patreon, I mentioned for this week that I was going to get around to reading the Umbrella Academy Volume 1, Apocalypse Suite, and I was true to my word, and I did get around to reading that. Again, for those who didn't read the document, that was mainly because I wanted to be the guy who said, you know what, I'm going to read the book first. The person that everyone just universally despises.
Right.
So I got through that. And for those unaware, that's Gerard Way writing, Gabriel Ba on pencils, Dave Stewart colors, Nate Picos letters. This originally came out in 2008 as a 6-issue collection. The basic premise is interesting. You have 43 children that are born all over the world, all at the same moment, to mostly single women who had previously shown no signs of pregnancy. Those who survive the process are abandoned or put up for adoption, which, I mean, like, yikes. You have this guy called Sir Reginald Hargraves. He's an Olympian, an inventor, also an alien. He tracks down and adopts as many of the kids as possible. Yes, now it's Pokemon, gotta catch them all. He only gets 7, so not that good. When asked why he did it, he says to save the world, and we really don't get much more about that at that time. The book sort of jumps around from there. We flash forward 10 years into the future to see them battle an Eiffel Tower gone mad, and then 20 years into the future from there. Now they're 30. They're largely estranged from one another, begrudgingly brought back together for the death of their adopted father. So these are all like well-worn beats we've seen before. Once the team that once got along breaks up, and we're left to figure out why it happened and what sort of wrenches exist in their interactions and relationships with one another.
Right.
We've seen this before, and then they're brought back together by some tragedy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes familiarity helps sort of put readers, I think, on the right track to, if you have a familiar foundation that readers can relate with, then you can go ahead and take that and gravitate it towards something perhaps a bit weirder. But this book really just feels a lot like Royal Tenenbaums meets X-Men. Basically.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that either. But like even on an aesthetic level, it really basically feels like that analogy works. Yeah. It feels a lot like Black Hammer. Black Hammer feels more layered, but it's also kind of unfair to make that assessment in full when I've only read the first volume of Umbrella Academy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's more or less X-Men if Xavier was a real bad dad, like a real bad dad.
Wait, hold on, Nick. I don't think you've read enough X-Men. He is the worst dad according to recent chronology.
Okay. Maybe this guy's like less subtle about it, or maybe Xavier. Sure. I mean, let me just give you a quote. This book ends every issue with everything from a weather report to a like census table mm-hmm. to one time they pull out a quote from this Sir Reginald guy. He was giving a speech talking about the kids. And he says, in closing, I'd like to point out that I never desired to break the children. I merely sought to foster their potential, which was unfortunately never that vast.
Oof. Wow.
He doesn't want them to call him father. He insists on being called the Monocle.
Okay.
He also, in turn, addresses them by numbers he assigned them. Which if you've seen like a show like Dark Matter, you're used to this stupid setup of having characters that are all known by numbers, which at the beginning you're like, this is dumb. And then eventually you're like, yeah, but 2 said he was going to kill 6's father, and that totally makes sense. And I'm sure I'm going to arrive at that point. It helps that they all have superhero code names too. Yeah. But here's the catch with that part. Okay. The numbers, it's not a random assigning thing or the order in which he found them. It's the order in which they're useful to him. So he's numerically assigned them numbers based on their utility. Which is, I mean, is it bad that I was like, I need to read more of this book? This guy's a real jerk. This is like daddy issues. Like this isn't even like daddy issues 101. This is like daddy issues 402. Here's your TA. Get to work.
Yeah. I mean, this has been on my list to read for a while, so I know that I need to read it because the show's coming out, because I also want to be that guy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a book that's been out for over 10 years, and I haven't read it, and it's gotten such like wide acclaim as being such a fantastic story. Like, it's one of those series that like I really should sit down and read it. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, it's fun, and the power set goes everything from like a guy who has super strength to a kid who can hold his breath indefinitely. I guess that's something.
Okay.
To a girl, I think this one's really interesting, who goes by the name The Rumor, and she can alter reality by telling lies. So if
what number is she?
She's number 3. Surprisingly, the kid who can hold his breath indefinitely is number 2. I don't know what this guy's priorities are, but honest to God. So, I mean, debate amongst your friends with that one. But so if she's being chased by, if there's like a car chase and she says something like, gee, it looks like your muffler just fell off, then, you know, the muffler falls off the car. So how is that not like infinite power?
Yeah.
And then, of course, number 7, no actual powers.
Okay.
Number 7 is no actual powers. So
that makes sense. I can understand that.
I've enjoyed it. The weird thing I've noticed, the last thing I'll just say about that briefly, is from the trailers and things that I've seen for the show, it seems like it's a lot of stuff that's either not in the books or not in Volume 1. Like, it really feels like Volume 1 is not a major presence within the show. I think Jordan was saying it looks like there's a lot more from Volume 2 that's actually in the show. So anyway, again, it's good. It's not revolutionary, but I mean, the art's great. It's an interesting foundation. I'll report back when I've read more.
Cool.
What about you, Mike?
For me, this week, I read a bunch of comics, actually, but the ones that I really want to talk about, my pick last week was Age of X-Man, NextGen #1. The follow-up that I want to just deliver here is, it was good. God damn it, they're doing something good over at the X-Men headquarters, and I'm all here. I'm here for it because I know
X-Man Scott and Jean's son.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
thank God.
Really, everyone should just listen to last week's episode, especially the after the credits, because we went real deep on who Nate Gray was in a lot of different ways. But anyways, the follow-up from last week was that it's a solid book. I highly recommend it. If you guys are, if anybody's buying into this Age of X-Man stuff like I am, at least pick up Next Gen. It was probably the most fun I've had in an X-Men book in a long time. Just because it's focusing on characters that are goofy, and that's what I want with my X-Men books. So, yeah, otherwise, I did also read a story, the first volume of a series called Oh Human Star, which is an ongoing webcomic, and if you don't own this, you don't have to buy it, you can go read it. Just look for O, the letter O, Human Star. There's a website you can go and read the entire comic. It's fantastic. This is a series by Blue Delaquante. The story is Alistair Sterling was the inventor who sparked the robot revolution, and because of his sudden death, he didn't get to see any of it. That is, until he unexpectedly wakes up in a robot body that matches his old one exactly, and finds out that 16 years have passed. Now, right there, that should hook you. I don't care who you are. That's a cool idea. All right? And
when you say robot revolution, do you mean like, wow, robotics have flourished, or no, oh God, the robots are killing us?
I mean, the robots have flourished. Now they are, robots are sentient beings that live among humans in the world. They work as your driver. They could also work at the library. You know, they're people as, for the most part, as equal as humans. Now, the specifics
Not if they're at
of
the
that
library, but I mean, okay.
The specifics of the whole where do humans sit along with robots hasn't fully been explored in the story, but the overall, this first volume super slayed me. It like gave me some backstory about Alistair, the character, as well as his partner, Brendan Pinsky, who was there working on these robots right before Alistair died. And you meet this character named Sulla, who is a clone of Alistair, but slightly different. And there's so many questions about this story, but the focal bits of Volume 1 is about what happened in those 16 years between when Alistair died and when he came back to life, how his company became the #1 robotics company in the world, and what it means to be alive even though you're a robot. And you start to ask these questions, and every time you're like, well, what about this thing? The book hits you with some other interesting plot point. So you don't have time to actually think about the questions you may have, because there's so much other stuff going on in the story. And this is one of those webcomics that is like a page-a-day kind of story. So every single page has to be interesting, because if you're reading this regularly, if you're up to date, you need an interesting hook every single week. I mean, maybe after 144 chapters or pages, you don't necessarily need that, but nonetheless, the story is written in such a way that every page captures you. And I sat down with Volume 1 and I couldn't stop reading. This is one of those books that just sucked me right in, and I literally like couldn't stop. I needed to finish the volume. And Volume 1 ends at the end of quote unquote chapter 3, which is about 140 pages. So like the chapters are pretty long here. And the hook at the end was like a nice conclusion to the arc, but also forced me to go out and buy the next volume. Like, I immediately was like, okay, that's the easiest purchase I've made this week. And I know that there's a whole bit about, Mike, you're not buying backlog books, you're not buying old books. I don't give a shit. All right, I'm reading this book. It's too beautiful for me to not buy.
Mike Rappin, make the rule, break the rule.
Yeah, and so if you're looking for something that's a little bit off the wall, that's independent, that's made by a one and done creator, I highly recommend Oh Human Star. It's such a beautiful, well told story. There's so much emotion in it, and I honestly was just blown away. Like, I've seen this book for a long time, like on Comixology, and I've seen other people recommend it, and I was like, I don't actually know what it's about. I like the color or the covers, but I never looked into it. And so going into it, I went completely blind. I did no research, and I got super sucked in. And so you can pick it up for $5 on Comixology or from the creator themselves, or you can just go read it all online for free. But I highly recommend you support this creator. This book is gorgeous. Like, the art is beautiful. The storytelling is beautiful. It's so well done. I was really, really impressed with this volume.
All right. You sold me, Mike.
I really recommend it. Go read the first chapter online, and if you love it, you should buy the rest of it. It's worth it. It truly is.
Cool.
Otherwise, let's talk about comics that are coming out this upcoming week. Comic books are dropping on February 20th, 2019. What are you guys excited for this week? I know I listed 3 books, but please, it was just for jokes. Let's start with you, Nick.
So for me, my pick this week is Incursion, #1. It's written by Andy Diggle and Alex Packnadel. Can't wait to find out that one's wrong. And illustrated by Doug Brathwaite. And yeah, it's true. I know I've been wearing my The End Is Nigh sandwich boards in regards to Valiant Comics lately. I won't deny that the first 2 issues of Bloodshot Rising Spirit were probably 2 of the worst issues I've read in a while. And I recently also passed on the advanced solicits for Cullen Bunn's Punk Mambo because he seems like a terrible fit. But all of that negativity aside, and my own apocalyptic visions regarding the future of this publisher, I do have some faith in Incursion. I do think this book has the potential to really be something good. Andy Diggle actually really surprised me with the unique ideas that he brought to his 2018 run on Shadow Man, even if I read it very begrudgingly, as I felt he was a super poor fit for that book, and the first arc wasn't that great. But he had some really revolutionary ideas with the second arc, where we visited a whole bunch of Shadow Man's different ancestors, or the people who had possessed the role of Shadow Man, from like the 1920s in New York to, I want to say, during the Civil War, all the way back to like 2000 BC or something like that in Africa. So it was a really interesting, very like time and space stretching idea, and I really enjoyed that. So Diggle, even though I still feel this is kind of like not his usual, I don't know, Thief of Thieves, The Losers, Green Arrow Year One sort of thing, he's got the benefit of a doubt. Packnadel is sort of a newer writer. He's done some work for Titan on like Assassin's Creed and Doctor Who. He's done stuff for Boom, like original things called Arcadia and Turncoat. Recently, he's doing that book for Vault called Friendo, which I guess is
Friendo is supposed to be
really
amazing.
well received. Apparently, yeah. And like Brathwaite, I don't need to go into him. He's a fucking legend. If you don't know Doug Brathwaite, look him up. He's done some amazing stuff like Bloodshot USA, Imperium, Armor Hunters. So, like, what's the deal with Incursion, though? Basically, we've actually got Eternal Warrior back, which is huge. Gilad Anipada, as he's otherwise known, has been dead since October of 2015, when he died at the end of Book of Death. And he was dead until a few months ago when he showed up again in Ninja K. Basically, we have a problem because this lady called Imperatrix Virago has figured out that the dead side isn't just a place where souls go after people die, but that basically it also has doors that open to different worlds, and she's basically used it as a subway of sorts to hop around between these worlds and take them over. And she's got sort of like an advanced guard character, and yes, it starts to have a bit of a setup that feels an awful lot like Galactus and the Silver Surfer.
Sure.
So, it should be interesting. It's only 4 issues. I don't think it's going to overstay its welcome. Yeah, it's nice to have this character back. I think it's a solid artist, and in terms of like faith in Valiant. This sort of is for me, it's a well-needed shot in the arm. So
cool. I have so many questions about a lot of the things you said about this book.
Yeah, there were some nouns in there that, I mean, there's just basically it was like, if you were following along with your Mad Lib book at home, you were just jotting in all of these insane things as I went along, and that's fine.
I mean, there begs I think we need a Valiant, episode where you just explain what the fuck is going on in some of these books. Because, I mean, I've read some of the Valiant books. I've enjoyed a lot of the Valiant books that I've read. But I wonder if there are listeners out there who are just like, I don't read any of this. What is he talking about?
I'm more worried that there's a listener out there who's like, right, of course. And then just actually starts arguing with me on the finer parts of canon, and I'm just never hearing that. So
yeah, bring it to the Goodreads group. We'll have some fights.
There are some real Valiant fans in there. I'll tell you what. There's a couple. It's great.
I know. Those guys are fantastic. Anyways, before we dive too deep into that, Paul, what are you excited for this upcoming week?
Just to say, I have no idea what you're talking about, Nick, and it's pretty great to hear you explain things, and I have zero idea. I thought I knew what Valiant was. I guess I don't. But
if you want to know what Valiant is and you want me to show you, then yeah,
we'll see. Yeah. We'll see. I have a pretty light week this week in terms of books coming out. The big one for me is GoBots #4 by Tom Scioli. I've talked about this book a bunch. You know it's great. I know it's going to be great. There's no reason for me to tell you any more than that. Go read it. GoBots is awesome.
Despite all the humans being dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's only 5 issues, so I literally have no idea how it's going to end. So it's so exciting to see that stuff. In addition to that, I did notice that DC is putting out a collection of stories written by Len Wein. DC Universe by Len Wein. That's something I'm going to definitely want to check out because Len Wein is, a legendary creator. He passed away, I think 2 years ago or last year. Not last year, but 2 years ago. A legendary creator at DC. He created Swamp Thing. He, also co-created a character you might have heard of called Wolverine for those other guys.
Yeah.
But he worked on a ton of DC stuff in the 70s. He wrote for issues of Phantom Stranger. He had a pretty legendary run on Justice League of America. He wrote Action Comics for a long time. Obviously, Swamp Thing, he wrote a bunch. And I've only read a small fraction of his stuff. I've only really read The Untold Legend of the Batman, which I'm on record as saying is my favorite and the best Batman comic ever. And I've also read a handful of his Swamp Thing issues, but this seems to collect a lot of the Justice League and Action Comics stuff and Phantom Stranger stories. So it's something I'm definitely going to want to check out. And it does run the whole gamut of his careers. I think it starts with his first issue that he ever wrote for DC and then ends with the Swamp Thing Winter Special that came out, I think, last year after he passed. It's his last comic that he wrote. So he's a creator that I want to read more stuff by, and this looks like a good collection of his stuff.
Awesome. That sounds exciting for anybody that's trying to dive into some old backstory stuff. Well, cool. Well, for me this week, I was going to plug another X-Men book. I said that I was going to. I won't. But Age of X-Men, the amazing Nightcrawler #1 comes out. My only notes for this are, let's just keep this train a-moving, baby, because I'm excited. Hulkverines #1 comes out this week. I don't know what the fuck that is. I'm too scared to dive in.
What's the word? Portmanteau?
Yes. I could do that with anything. Let's read.
You shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't.
But my actual pick this week is Wildstorm #20. This is Warren Ellis and John Davis Hunt. The final arc of this series is kicked off, I think. I believe this whole series is supposed to be 24 issues. And I just read number 19 today. And I feel like 19 was a prelude to what's coming in issue 20, like the beginning of the end of this series. Whatever crazy wild shit Warren Ellis has planned is all coming to a point now. And there was a lot of very fun DC jokes in issue 19 for anyone that was reading, like Darkseid is apparently a villain in a movie series within the Wildstorm universe. Wonder Woman is like a comic book character. Like the whole DC universe is like a comic book in this world. It's a joke. It's all fiction. And yet we're seeing characters that have definitely shown up in the DC universe in Wildstorm. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out. The whole bits with aliens and stuff. This book is so mind-blowing. I just don't know what to say about it. So I'm very excited to see how this book plays out. I'm a sucker for Warren Ellis. We're going to talk about that more after the break. But like, yeah, this book series is wild, and it makes me think that I need to go back and reread Warren Ellis's run on Stormwatch and Authority, just so that I can come back to this and actually maybe appreciate it a little bit more than I did the first time through. So I'm excited to see where this book starts to go when it comes to the end.
Yeah, I have not seen a book as well paced and as well plotted as this.
I agree.
In a long, long time. Like, when they said, like, right at the beginning, this is going to be 24 issues, that's the plan, I was like, interesting. Let's see how this plays out. And yeah, I've just been nothing but impressed with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's very clear that Warren Ellis had this whole story plotted out from the get-go. And I think even the stuff with Michael Cray that tied in was partially planned, because the bits with Michael Cray in the secondary series, the Wildstorm Michael Cray, was definitely played back into the second arc, I believe, the end of the second arc. So it's really impressive. It's such a great thing to see when you're like, all right, this whole story is playing out from beginning to end. We're not going to miss a month. We're just going to get this book out in 2 years. I think that's really impressive. And yeah, this book it's been a lot of fun, even though it's very dense. I can definitely say that.
I'm going to have to read this at some point, aren't I?
I mean,
yes.
it's
Yes.
very. I would really like to see someone else's take on this, because I'm like very like seeing things through rose-colored glasses, because I'm gonna read anything this dude puts out.
Right.
So I'm very biased to kind of roll with some of the punches a lot more than other people. And I know Warren Ellis, especially lately, has, I think, he hasn't been like everyone's like, oh, he's definitely doing some great stuff like he was maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I think some of his stuff can be very hit or miss for people. I still consider it all really good. Like, I really love his weird atmospheric shit that he does, like with Trees, and that he was doing with Injection. Injection, basically like a sequel to Planetary in a lot of ways.
Oh, sure.
But I think this book, to Nick's point, is very well paced, and it feels like a super structured story from beginning to end. Like, he knew how everything was going to tie together, like almost in a weird reflection of itself. So
you don't ever hit that issue of the book where you're like, all right, this is where everyone was like we need to take a break, or I don't know where to take the story.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't exist here. And the fact that this book has had the exact same team from beginning to end, I'm pretty sure there have been no exceptions to that. I'm at least certain John Davison has drawn every single issue, and what a perfect choice he was for this book.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're gonna just fawn over all the creators that we love some more.
Yeah, perfect. That's fine.
Before we start this week's topic, I want to do two things. One, I want to shout out to Jeff for being an awesome backer on our Patreon. Thank you, Jeff, for your support. We cannot do some of the things that we want to do without your support, and we really appreciate that. And number two, did you guys happen to see that we dropped a new series on Patreon? Because we're doing a new thing called Book versus Book. Nick and I sort of previewed it earlier, I guess late last year, but we're doing a whole new series on our Patreon that's two people talking about two different books that they picked for each other. So if you're not a Patreon backer, make sure you go over there, back our show, and you can get access to this brand new series, as well as all of the other amazing stuff. I just sent out a ton of stickers to people. I just sent out a whole bunch of messages. We're going to buy some fun little trinkets at C2E2 this year, and we're going to mail those out to people. So make sure to go to our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast and check that out. This Book versus Book series is gonna be amazing. I already know what the next two episodes are gonna be, and they are top tier. Brian and Paul did the first episode, and it's amazing. And the next two are even better. So enough with the
What does that say about Paul?
Listen,
Yeah, geez.
self-flagellation. Listen, I love you guys, but we've got some fucking amazing stuff. It's
That's
unbelievable that we could top ourselves, and we've done it. So let's talk about what we're actually here to talk about this week. What makes you impulse buy a comic? Like, there's a ton of factors that go into, you're walking into the shop, or you're on Comixology, you're on Humble Bundle, or you're somewhere, and you're looking at comics and you go, you know what? I've never heard of this, or I have heard of this. I'm just going to pick it up. It's not already on my pull, but I want to read it. What goes through your guys' heads when you're at a shop or online or something, and you see something new and you're like, let's just try that? What's the factors that goes into that?
Well, I think for a lot of people that have been buying comics, reading comics for a long time, you develop allegiances to certain creators. So if there's a new series by a creator that you already like, you're already going to buy that book. I mean, that happens to me a bunch. I basically have a standing, order at my local shop that anything that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips do, it's going to be in my pull box. It doesn't matter what publisher it is, what the story is. Those guys, they're always going to get pulled for me. And I think there's a familiarity there where once you establish that with the creator, it's easy to pull the trigger on those books. On the other hand, I'm Grant Morrison apologist. I'm willing to say that, but there are books that he's put out that I've just skipped. Do I need to see Grant Morrison do a book about Santa Claus? Probably not. So I skipped that.
Right.
Maybe down the road I'll pick up the trade or read it, through the library. But there's a fine line where something's got to align where it's the creator team, or for me it's the artwork. If the artwork isn't good, it's not going to probably get picked up for me. So that's kind of my back and forth, is like sticking with creators I like or branching out, trying some artwork that's exciting.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm totally a sucker for Warren Ellis. I kind of said that before the break. Like anything that guy puts out, I'm at least going to try the number one, and chances are I'm just going to put it on my pull list. I shop at Midtown Comics because I'm a shill, and not to say that they're not a fine establishment, because they totally are. They're very, very nice people, and that place, they do a lot to make sure that people get comics in their hands. But I don't have any established relationship with the people that work behind the cash register that are like, hey, if this comes in, get it for me. Because one, I'm trying to limit the number of books that I'm buying, and two, it's like I'm not really too worried about missing out on a book because it's Midtown. But if there's a Warren Ellis book, I'll see it, the solicitation, I'll see something about it, and I'll just put it on my pull list there and make sure that it shows up, or I'll subscribe to it on Comixology or something. I totally get that. But it's the thing that is really interesting to me is going through, I don't know if you guys do this, but I do this every once in a while. I'll walk just down the line of comics and see all the comics on the shelves and kind of go, well, I've never heard of that because I haven't followed the solicits in a while because I'm a total dummy. But let's just pick up this random number one, or I'll see something on Comixology and I'll be like, you know what? I like that cover, or I like what this book looks like. Let's actually try it. Do you guys do that very often?
Not as often as I used to, because, as you mentioned, Mike, I'm trying to watch my budget and to limit the number of books I have to store in my apartment or my house here.
Right.
But there's a few times where it's worked for me in the past. Early this episode, I mentioned the Female Furies book number one. I was going to buy that based on the character. That's another thing. That being a DC fan, I'm sure you have it with the X-Men, where if there are certain characters, if there's a book coming out, you're just going to try it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
If there's like a Mr. Miracle book or a Big Barda book, I'm going to pick it up. A Martian Manhunter book, no matter how many different versions of that character that they do, I'm going to pick up a Martian Manhunter book.
Yeah.
Luckily they usually work out for me. I talked about Female Furies early, where it's like a book that might not work for me issue to issue, but I'm still curious about. In terms of stuff that I'm completely unfamiliar with, I think the last book I really took a chance on and it worked for me was Cry Havoc. I had never read anything by Cy Spurrier. I knew I liked Ryan Kelly's artwork already, but that book, I flipped through it. I saw the gimmick with the three different colorists, where you had different colorists for each segment of the story. Mm-hmm. That was interesting enough for me to grab issue one, and I stuck with it. I'm glad I did. So sometimes that pays off, just picking something up off the shelf on a whim.
Yeah. Nick, what about you?
Well, I think something you guys touched on that definitely works for me, and I think shop owners out there, get on this, because this is definitely a strategy you want to be taking advantage of. I find that there are certain books, and I've talked about this a little bit before, that I'm just sort of on the fence about. If I go to my local shop or I go to a bigger shop, and I enjoyed the last issue of it, then I'll just grab the next one. These aren't books that are on my pull. I just sort of, if I'm still enjoying it, I try to get my hands on the next one. If I don't, no big deal. They're books that I'm liking enough to keep reading, but not loving enough to put on my pull. And just if I start missing issues, then I just pick it up in trade, or I pick it up in digital. But I'll tell you what works in terms of that. And that is if there's like I said, a book that I would call a fence book, and it's the last issue, I'm probably going to take it. So out of just sheer fear of never finding it again. So
right.
All of the shops that I frequent, if you have extra copies, remove those before I come in. I'm pretty consistent on the days I come in, relatively consistent on the times. Pay attention. You'll figure out my routine, and just remove the extra copies and just I mean, you're not going to watch your finances soar, but you're going to make a few extra dollars for sure.
You're going to get Nick is what it is. This is
if
the
you
get
put
Nick
me
theory.
in a pressure situation, I generally do horribly. This is just one scenario where that happens. If you've ever listened to me on this show, you've probably heard other ones. Another one that's great is if you're like Comixology and you send me a coupon and you're like, hey, this is a really sweet deal. It ends in 2 days. Get on this now. Now go to the website, find some stuff, throw it in the cart. Here's the code. Here's the code. Put the stuff in. You only have 47 hours now. What do you do? You're gonna miss out. You're gonna be the idiot. So
yeah.
That works too. Like if you like send me like a coupon with 24 hours or whatever, that usually tends to get me all worked up and anxious of, fear of missing out on comics. So
well, it's not like those digital comics are going to go away. I think your fear of missing out is just the price that it's currently at, which is discounted like $3 or something.
They're in that cloud, and like if I don't take it from that cloud, then like someone else will. So,
well, that raises it.
I think someone needs to explain the cloud to you, and like this show isn't the place for it. But if I don't get it, someone else. Anyway, it's
go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say that raises an interesting question. Where is it at times a price issue? Because you're talking about sales. I have so many digital comics that I've never looked at that I bought in those sales. Oh, yeah. So I really have to limit myself at that point. And similarly, I have a long box full of comics I bought out of the dollar bin that I've never flipped through. I just was digging through the dollar bin like, oh, that looks cool. Oh, Wild Dog? Sure. Or like, some old random DC stuff. Like, sure, I'll grab that.
Yeah,
I did read Wild Dog. That is the one I read. But I have random issues of like Phantom Stranger, random issues of Action Comics, random Batman stuff, just stuff that like it's in the dollar bin. I'm going to buy a big stack, or at a convention, everyone's liquidating their stuff. They're selling the dollar books for like $5 for $1. So
right,
I accumulate all this stuff. I never look at it, but part of the impulse is saying like, oh, there it is. It's this price. Okay, it's mine now. And that's maybe not the healthiest way to buy stuff, but it does happen a lot for me.
Well, I mean, that buildup is really almost stressful in a way. Like this is, I don't know if you guys read my opening to the zine, which I realized probably needed an editor on it, but my opening to the zine for this that just came out, like, and I realized we didn't announce this on the show. The zine came out. You guys should go to ircbpodcast.com/zine and read it. I'm a total dingus and didn't announce it, but the opening that I talked about, this whole thing that I've been trying since the beginning of the year, where like I'm reading at least 1 or 2 backlog items a week. Like I'm trying to clear out both my physical and digital backlog, because I'm looking at the number and I'm looking at a shelf and I'm going, oh no, this whole bookcase, the top 2 shelves I haven't read. What is wrong with me, right? And it's a crazy thing, because you end up in that situation, just like you described, Paul, where you're like, oh, I'll just grab these issues and, it's fine. Or I'll just grab these items. They're on sale. It's $2 a trade for Marvel trades right now. How can I pass that up?
Right.
And then you realize, oh no, now I have 400 backlog items that I need to read, or whatever the number is, and it's this weird pressure, because you've also got your books coming out every week. You've also got the comics that you're like, oh, well, I was going to reread Doom Patrol anyway, so let's just do that on top of all the backlog stuff that you've got. It's a whole chaotic thing. And this whole idea of impulse buying a comic only adds to that. But I mean, that's not what we're here to talk about. But I'm just saying, like, the pressure is real, guys.
Yeah, but I think part of the impulse is that idea of like, it's something that's right in front of you. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard for me to track down stuff that, even if I know there's good stuff out there, I don't go out of my way to track it down. But if my shop is stocking the new Image or the new Vertigo trades at $10 a pop right in front of me, this is very easy to grab off the shelf. Something I maybe wouldn't go out of my way to grab normally. So the impulse, that's why it's called an impulse buy. You see it and it's like, oh yeah, I want that, And at $10 a pop, those trades are pretty easy to make that decision on. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, that's the thing. Image trades will get you every time with that price point. Like it's unbelievable, and I think it's a great model for them. To say like, hey, just try this. It's only $10. And you're getting 6-ish issues of content. And I know we've like talked to this concept to death on the show, but like that still works on me.
Which makes it interesting that it seems that they're kind of moving away from that, but.
Well, I think there's also like I think that was something that Image was really trying to do maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Like, I know that was something we
Sure.
really talked about on the show when we first started it, was like, holy cow, can you believe that Image is doing this? And I think they're moving away from that is kind of a reflection of the direction that comic creators are going, where they're probably asking for a little bit more money. Not that it's undue, because it absolutely is. Like, comic creators, I think, are still pretty underpaid for the work that they put out, right? And the only answer to fix that is to increase the price of comics or something. Like, I don't know the answers. I'm not an economist, and Jim Zub is the person you actually want to talk to about this. Go to his site. He's got article after article about this. But
well, offhand, it does feel like, and I don't want to speculate.
No, go ahead, go for it.
You know, around this topic at end, but it really does feel like when you're seeing the books that are still remaining, and I'd really have to look into this more, but again, this is just my feeling. When you see the books that are remaining with opening volumes at $9.99 right now, and the ones that are shifting up to $12.99 or $14.99, it does feel like the more established creators are the ones that are having the higher price points.
Oh, sure.
And
sure.
that, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, that's just, it adds up, but that's just kind of what I've noticed, which, you know, sometimes an extra, when you're making an impulse decision, an extra $4 kind of kicks you out of impulse mode pretty quickly, you know?
That's partially been like a blocker for me in some cases, like some of the Vault books in collected edition, some of the Black Mask books in collected edition. The price point's usually a little bit higher, but at the same time, I usually argue with myself and say, but it's critically acclaimed, or like, it's got such great reviews, like, it's probably worth that price point. But it does make me second guess my impulse buy, because there are books out there that are coming out, like Wasted Space or Friendo, or, you know, these other books that I think have been very highly regarded as like, Vault is really kicking butt with these books. And yet I'm a little bit blocked because I don't see their books on sale, or I don't see their trades coming out at, like, they're coming out at $20. Like, and that's what it is. But I think that's Black Mask and that's Vault trying to do right by their creators and saying, like, we're not going to discount your stuff and make sure that you guys take a hit. We want to make sure you guys get fully paid. And they're a much smaller shop, and I'm sure their production costs are a little bit higher because they don't have whatever bulk discounts you may get from being a Marvel or an Image or a Boom or something like that.
Right.
So the question then I have then is, if you see these trades and the price point is just on the edge there where it could go either way, is there something that tips your hand toward buying it? You know, is there something that would make you buy it versus not?
I mean,
sure.
For me, I've just been killed by art, and I've been like, this is too beautiful to pass up. Like, no joke. Yeah. If the art in the book or like the synopsis like really gets me, I'm a sucker. I'm in. Like, if Oh Human Star, like, that's a $5 trade. The book I was talking about that I read recently, if that was $12, $15, I probably still would have bought it because the concept is too cool to pass up. Yeah. Like, I'll just say that, you know, but there are cases where that price point can like outweigh it. But Nick, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a shallow bastard, so I'm a sucker for, like, is the back matter good? Is there actual back matter in the book? Okay. Does it have a beautiful spot gloss cover that, like, a lot of Boom books tend to have, or an image trade, you know, tends to have? Things like that. Because ultimately, like, and this is something I've noticed, like, impulse buying is not something that goes away the longer you're in comics, which you would think. Think, I mean, you can say, ha ha ha, Nick, you're a capitalist consumer, you know, cradle to grave. It doesn't change. But my point is that, like, you think the more you're involved in comics, you're like, wow, I'm more of a savvy consumer now. I know not to fall for these things. I know that these books that I bought when I was, you know, younger were stupid. I'm growing up. I'm an adult. But really, impulse buying just shifts where it is. It just basically turns into something else. And so for me, like, a lot of my impulse buying when I was a younger reader was stupid trades. And now it's just me saying, I don't have room for more trades. I don't have room for more single issues. And so it's just gravitated into digital. It doesn't go away. It just finds its way into something else. And like, that's the other thing I think for me, and this is just me overthinking things, but like for me, when I look at a trade a lot of the time, like a physical trade, like in my mind, I can't help it, but I just mentally break it down to how much I'm paying per issue.
Yes.
Sure,
and if I'm
sure.
paying more per issue for the trade versus singles, like that almost becomes a bit of a deal breaker in its own right for me.
Sure.
Like at that point, you have to bring more things to the table. Because like I felt like it used to be one of the quote unquote rewards of being, I don't know, patient or waiting for the trade was that generally speaking, because you had to wait and everyone else got the story first, you were rewarded with a lower price point. And depending upon the publisher, I feel that's just not true. So you got to bring other stuff to the table. Otherwise,
Right. That's where the back matter comes in and all that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. That's very pragmatic, Nick.
Yeah, it's like excessively, like, I feel like it's just me going around with like a checklist, and clearly we're talking about something that's ineffable and aesthetics and art, and I'm like, well, $3.97 dollars per issue, this is clearly not something that satisfies me on a marginal level.
Sure.
So,
I can appreciate that. Whereas for me, it's definitely artwork. I mean, there's been a lot of books that have had a lot of buzz about them, creators that, I even like, that if I flip the first few pages and the art doesn't grab me, I'm not going to buy it. I'll wait till it shows up on Hoopla or something. And then on the other hand, there's stuff that I'll buy the hardcover trade when it comes out, sight unseen, because I know it's going to look nice. I mean, at this point, pretty much, if Box Brown puts out a book, I'm going to buy it. You know what I mean? That's an investment, at that point.
Yes.
And then Lisa Hannawalt's another one. I mean, I bought the new Lisa Hannawalt book, sight unseen, Coyote Dog Girl. I'm like, oh, there it is. I think it was, maybe $20 as a hardcover or $24. No problem. So for me, it's that ineffable sort of, I like the artwork enough. The price isn't really an option at that point. I'm not going to break down like, well, it's only this many pages, the price per page and stuff. So for me, it's always going to be, since comics are a visual medium, it's got to be artwork that I vibe with, that makes me buy it.
Yeah, I mean, and then to go along that same route, I mean, like, it doesn't hurt that if you have someone's recommendation. Like I talk about,
sure.
It's really easy to just pick up a book on impulse to say, oh, this looks nice. But if you don't go to the shop every week, like I don't go to the shop every week, I probably go every other week. And if I hear someone talk about a book, like either on this show or if I hear someone talk about elsewhere, like on Twitter, maybe there's a lot of buzz about something. Maybe I'll consider a book that came out last week and pick it up. Or I'll go on Comixology and say, oh yeah, I'll put that on my wish list and maybe wait for it to go on sale or just pick it up outright. Especially if there was a trade that came out of a collected edition of something that I knew already had a lot of buzz. If a lot of people are talking about it, like, I want to be in on the know, right? It's that FOMO thing. It's the same kind of thing. But I don't know. It does help to get personal recommendations. Like, no joke, I don't think I would have ever picked up this Andre the Giant book if Paul hadn't recommended it. And like, now I'm in the same boat as you, Paul. If Box Brown is putting out a comic, I'm buying it. There's no question about it. Yeah. And there are other creators that are like that, that put out OGNs that I'm just like, yeah, no problem. I'm just going to pick this up full price. I don't even need to wait. I just want to read it.
I think so. And another point that raises in my mind is that I find myself more willing to be impulsive on OGNs versus trades because I primarily read stuff in single issues. So you kind of agree, I guess.
Yeah.
Trades, like, go ahead.
The thing about OGNs that always gets me is that in my mind, there have been very few original graphic novels that I've picked up that have been like, oh, that was trash. Right? Like, it's. Yeah. I feel like with an original graphic novel, there is usually something bigger there. Like it's one thing to pitch a series that kind of needs popularity and is serialized and stuff. And I'm not trying to like degrade the serialization of comics because that's not what I'm doing here. But I'm saying like with an OGN, there's like a lot of investment into one big deliverable. And I feel like something like that is usually really, really honed by the creator. And maybe the publisher comes in to step in and try to make things work. But I think it's mostly the creator. And so they're putting in a ton of work and time and effort, similar to like a prose novel. Like there are bad prose novels out there, but a lot of the times I feel like maybe this is just me being optimistic. You come out of books and you kind of go, there were some things that weren't great, but overall it was good. And I feel like with original graphic novels, it's at another level, right? Like the art has to be very good. The writing and the story has to be very, very good. Like, and everything's usually done by one, maybe two people And so the outcome of that book is actually like usually of a higher quality than maybe you'd get from single issues. And that's, again, I'm not trying to degrade single issues,
No.
but things can definitely waver with those kinds of stories, whereas an OGN has to be like very on from beginning to end. Otherwise the OGN doesn't work. You know?
Extra, read all about it. Mike Rappin sets hierarchy of comics.
Good, sure, whatever. I love
don't read
original
that
graphic
filth,
novels.
he said, throwing all of his X-Men issues in the trash.
Yeah. This is the same guy who's definitely buying all the X-Men comics that are coming out right now, unabashedly. So, whatever. I think that like both of those types of delivery systems for comics work, but I always feel like original graphic novels have a little bit more polish sometimes. That's all I'm getting at.
And there's sorry, Nick. I was going to say there's also something for me about a lot of that. If it's the artwork I'm getting, it's artwork I want to have a physical copy of as opposed to reading digitally. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
like,
agree.
An OGN,
Right.
like it looks nice. You know, it's got artwork I like. I put it on my bookshelf so people can see it, as opposed to putting it in a long box, which you'll probably
Right.
never see the light of day again. You know,
Right.
so that's the difference there as well.
And when it comes to impulse buys for those, usually it's like you get sold by picking up that book, looking at a couple pages, maybe flipping through the whole book and going like, cool, I could get on board for, 150, maybe 400 pages, depending on the OGN. Like I can pay the higher price point of maybe like $25. Like Jeff Lemire's Roughneck. That's a book that is humongous and it's like $30, but like it's a whole story. It's a huge book, and it's a whole story from beginning to end, and it's going to look great on your bookshelf, easy to pick up. Now, that's Jeff Lemire, but, I've picked up, like, The Long Walk to Valhalla, which is an OGN from Boom Studios, I believe, and it's a whole story. I won't go into the whole spoilers of it, because I feel like there's a lot to reveal, but I saw that on the shelf, never heard of it before, just picked it up. I thought, it looks really nice. I really like the way they played with color in this, and I picked it up. Full price, no big deal. Like, that feels really braggy, and I'm not trying to brag like I have money to do that, but like, what I'm saying
They were
is
like,
that the
sir, it's
impulse was
50%
there.
off. And I was like, no, full price.
Yeah, no.
It's worth it. You're worth it.
What I'm getting at is like the impulse was easy because the book looked completed. I got to see what everything was, and it was an easy purchase. It didn't take a lot of convincing there.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of an example of that. And the one I come back to is I remember being in a shop once here in Grand Rapids where they have a bunch of trades on the wall, and I'm just kind of walking through the aisles, just kind of looking for something to grab my attention. There's a book called Babies in Black. It's by Arne Bellstorff. And it's a book about Stuart Sutcliffe, who was the original bass player for the Beatles, who left the band in like 1961 to become an artist in Germany. So it's like, I'm walking the shop, I'm like, that's a comic book about the Beatles. I'm going to buy it. There was like literally no thought involved. I'm like, oh, I like this artwork. It's about the Beatles. Sold.
Right.
Sometimes that's all it takes. But you have to have the book in front of you for that to happen. I had no idea that book existed until I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened when I walked in and they had a special local comic shop day variant trade of Secret Weapons with a special David Mack cover.
Yeah.
I was like, Nick,
That's
you
what
own
happened
this
to me.
in singles, you own this in digital, you actually already own the hardcover trade. And I was like, yeah, but this one has a David Mack cover. It's totally different. What is it? It doesn't matter what it costs. Hello,
Yeah.
cashier.
That happened to me with 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank. I think I saw the local comic book shop day edition of it, and I was like,
Seriously,
oh, this
fuck
is a
those
stupid
things. I'll tell you why fuck those things. I was over at the shop yesterday. They have a special cover for, gosh, is it Aliens Defiance? No, it's what's the other one running? Dust to Dust. They have a variant of a #1 Dust to Dust that's done by Stokoe.
Oh boy.
And it looks like his Dead Orbit work, but it's for Dust to Dust, and it's $12. And I was like, "Fuck you!" When I have more money, and then I hid it between a couple of the other comics for Dust to Dust. So no one, please go to my shop. It's waiting for me for when I have the money.
We will have Nick's shop address in the show notes. We
Please
expect
don't
everyone to
tell
go there
them.
and find that.
Guys, it's right next to the other like #1s or whatever. It's just not where it was. Okay, it's just a little less front and center. I'm not, One of the other things that like I think bugs me about trades, and I think this is like my neuroses shining front and center, is like I fucking hate it when trade dress changes.
What do you mean?
Like, you know how like when you line them up and the spines suddenly look different because the publisher has decided they're going with a different aesthetic?
Oh yeah.
I've got that.
Oh,
I've had that in a
my
couple issues, yeah.
God.
Or volumes, I should say. I have all of Transmetropolitan in trade, And I think after volume 8, I started to pick up a different edition and I didn't realize it. So the spines don't line up and it drives me crazy when I look at it. Like right now they're hidden behind a bunch of manga volumes just so that I don't have to
No
look
one
at
can
it.
see my shame.
Yeah. It's like, hey, Mike, have you read Transmetropolitan? Oh, yeah, just don't look for it on my shelf.
Just volumes 1 through 7. Ignore the other. No.
Those were misprints that I accidentally picked up.
Then the other one that like bugs me is when I start collecting a book in trade and then they decide to change the, like, for example, like Lazarus you can collect in singles, you can collect in digital, you can collect in trades, or you can collect in omnibuses.
Right.
Or like Walking Dead, I think there's like 3 different trade tiers that the book is published in. And like I hate it when like I collect it one way and then I realize maybe I would have preferred it the other way or whatever. So
Oh yeah. I bought Saga Volume 1 and I was like, why didn't I just wait for the big book editions to come out? Because those look so much nicer on your shelf.
Yeah. Oddly enough, I've found myself way more comfortable to impulse buy trades when the series or whatever it is done.
Oh yeah.
Because like at that
then you
point,
know
I'm like,
the number that you're actually getting invested in.
yeah, here's everything continuity wise. It all looks the same, and I don't have to worry about the sort of weird changes and foibles that come with a serialized book that you're getting in trade.
So let me pose a question to you guys, as you know, esteemed comic reading veterans. Do you guys still get sucked into covers that like to say, hey, let's try this number 1, look at that cover? Does that still happen to you guys?
I'll do you one worse, actually.
Oh no.
Hey, have you ever been like sucked in where like it's number 3 of a series and you just think the cover's pretty and you're maybe gonna read the issue but maybe not because it's number 3, but it's like a Tula Lotte cover and it's like, this looks great. And it goes in your pretty covers boxes of issues you probably won't read.
I mean, I do that sometimes. I still buy random one-off covers because I think they look nice. I guess what I'm asking is, do you guys get sucked into like a number 1 that you've never heard of that just because of the cover art, and then like maybe try to read it, maybe continue it? Has that happened to you recently?
Yeah, and it's bizarre because even sometimes like the rational part of you, obviously if you've read comics just a little bit, even though this is less of a problem now, the rational part of you goes, hey, guess what? Interior art probably doesn't look the same.
Sure.
Maybe I better go take a look-see. You open it up, you flip through the interior art. It's not bad, but it's definitely not the same thing. And I feel like something like, for example, like Alex Ross books with books with an Alex Ross cover, right? Like you automatically like, you know, you just guard yourself for the fact that, you know, when you flip that opening cover, it's not going to be anything like it.
Right.
But my point being that even then, sometimes you'll flip it open and you're like, okay, the art's not the same. I still want to read this book. And I guess in that sense, the cover works because it drives you to actually open up the book beyond it.
Right.
And so I guess that counts for something. It definitely worked for me with Fire and Stone. The covers were awesome, and I flipped it open and I gave it a chance. And
everyone can go listen to our Fire and Stone minisode to see how obsessed Nick is with that series.
Versus Planetary, check it out. Book v book.
But Paul, what about you? Does that still happen to you?
I don't find myself doing that often. I honestly can't remember the last time I picked up a book totally, blind, other than the cover. I think, Nick hinted at it. My biggest thing is like, if it's a really pretty cover and I pick it up and the interior artwork is different, I'm probably not going to buy it. You know what I mean? So, because I'm such like a sucker for beautiful artwork or unique artwork. So, and I honestly can't remember that the cover really being the thing that made me pick up a book, to the point where I picked it up and bought it. There's definitely been points where I've seen a cover. I think I was at the shop and the new Buffy series was on the shelf, and I didn't know. Right. The covers are so pretty on that.
Dude, Kevin Wada, he fucking nailed it with that series. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I saw the cover, like, ooh, what is this? I didn't even look at the name of the comic. I'm like, ooh, what is this? I flipped over, I'm like, oh, it's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer comic. No thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because I think that, I've done this before where I've picked up comics and they've been like, oh, this number 1 looks pretty. Like that happens to me. I do that just because I'm a sucker and I read it and I go, well, maybe I'll just wait. But I think, it's funny that even after reading comics for a really, really long time, like we still hold to this thing that if the cover doesn't match the interior, it's like a deterrent from actually buying it. I mean, I don't think I would be disappointed as a comic reader to pick up an Alex Ross Amazing Spider-Man comic and then open it up and find Ryan Ottley drawing it, because I love Ryan Ottley's stuff. But I do wonder if people are pushed that much. Like, I think we are, maybe new readers are the same way. I know that's just it's funny that that's still like a thing that affects all comic readers. It doesn't matter how long you've been reading. Like, if the cover art doesn't match the interior, you're going to be a little bit disappointed.
Exactly.
Unless you know going into it, like, Tula Lote definitely is not on whatever book, that's fine. But we know that versus someone who doesn't necessarily read comics all the time. I think, like, what was her last ongoing? Was it 7 or Blue Rose? Whatever that book was?
I think it was, yeah.
Still, it's just funny. I just was curious because I still do that every once in a while. I'll pick up a number 1 just because I think it looks nice or whatever. But, like, it's funny because if you look at something like Criminal, right? Criminal number 1 came out, and the cover for that, still done by Sean Phillips, does not look like the interior, even though it's also Sean Phillips. But it's him using think about it. Like, it's really funny.
That is an interesting phenomenon.
The style's the same, but it's definitely Sean Phillips painting versus Sean Phillips drawing, which I think is really interesting.
Or even sometimes you have those artists that, when they just have more time to work on their art, like, their art sort of turns onto a different level. Like, it's a different tier of their art when they're just given, sort of transforms into something different. I don't know. Like, I still see, like you talked about Tula Lote, and I still see that sometimes, like, even just the cover artist can do a really good job of, like, setting the tone for the book, even if obviously they don't do the interior artwork. Yeah. And of course, if the book decides to keep that cover artist around for just sort of continuity between, instead of just shuffling them, I think that has its own, has its own value as well. I suppose. So.
I think, like, that's the reason that I kept going back to Euthanauts, right? Like, Paul, I know I think you told me you were talking about that at one point on the show, and I was like, oh man, I should really go back and read that. And, like, man, like, the covers for that book, definitely one of my favorite covers of 2018, issue number 3 of that series, with the skull astronaut. Like, that is just phenomenal. No, it's not the same as the interior art, but I think, Nick, to your point, it definitely sets the tone for that issue, in a way that's like, this is going to be grim and crazy, and it's going to blow your fucking mind. And that's exactly what Euthanauts is. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I always just, sometimes I like the juxtaposition, because what you're getting is sort of like instantaneously like a variation on a theme, if you will.
Sure.
A different interpretation, which is like, that's always been like one of my biggest reasons that I really enjoy variant covers, is that it's an opportunity for someone else to come in and show their take on things. So
definitely.
Again, like, the obviously the bottom line being, like, as long as you are aware of, and maybe that needs to be like part of the terms and agreements when you read a comic. Like, I understand.
Sign this big 20-page document before you open this comic.
I understand that not every page in this book that was done over a month does not look like an Alex Ross painting. Right. To which I would say, thank God, sign me up now.
I'm just gonna go bury myself in my Kingdom Come book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, cool. I guess. Do you guys have any final thoughts about impulse buying? I mean, I guess we could wrap it up here. I'm going to say we're running out of tape. There's no such thing as digital tape. It just doesn't exist. But any final thoughts?
I think we've been pretty honest about our buying habits. I also just want to reiterate that it's always worth taking a chance on a comic. I'm a big proponent of, I'm a big proponent of jumping onto a series, even if it's not a number 1. If something looks appealing and it's interesting to you, and you have the extra $3 or $4 in your pocket that week, take a chance on a comic. You might be surprised. I think taking a chance is something that we need to do more as comic book readers.
I agree.
Yeah, I would definitely say, being the core hypocrite here, there's nothing wrong with following through on people giving you recommendations. It's definitely something that I would recommend. It's really a win-win. If they're right, you get to read a great book, and if they're wrong, you get to hold that over them for however long you want to. I don't understand people that aren't opposed to reading recommendation. I mean, how do you lose in that scenario?
Yeah, there's something to be said about that in terms of you're losing time out of your life, right? But I'm also of the opinion that, like, there is always something to take away from a comic to a certain extent,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Oh,
I don't think you're
totally.
going to pick up something like, I don't mean to bash on a whole publisher, but some of those Xenosaga books that are out there and maybe aren't full of like awesome gems, but at the same time, there's always something to take away from a comic book. Like the way that someone's telling a story, may not look the way that you like, but there is something always to take away from a comic, good or bad.
I think a lot of times you can learn a lot more by reading a bunch of 7s than reading a bunch of 10s.
Yeah. I mean, even going so far as to read a book that is notoriously bad. There is some value in this is just like watching a bad movie or a bad TV show. You can always take away something from it that is positive and is going to enrich you in the comics experience. So to go off of this whole thing, like take a chance on something and just try to enjoy it with whatever capability that you can.
Read bad comics, guys.
Read comics in general. That's pretty much the message here. So let's all get off our soapboxes and remind people that they should go read the zine. It's out there. I want to reiterate, I forgot to plug it, so I'm double plugging it this episode. Go read the zine, ircbpodcast.com/zine, or you can go to our store and you can buy a physical copy and I'll mail you one with a bunch of stickers. So to wrap up, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paulie. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. And you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where we post all sorts of stuff. I've scheduled so many cool things, and I'm so excited for the stuff that we have coming over the next couple of months. We're going to go to C2E2 and record a bunch of stuff. We're going to play a bunch of tabletop games because we're nerds. It's going to be amazing. The next couple months are going to be fantastic for the show. I'm so excited.
And if you've got the time, go ahead, check out our Goodreads group. We have weekly threads and Book of the Month discussions. Recently, I posted some stuff on there about Umbrella Academy and wanted to know people's thoughts on that. If you've got some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it. Beyond that, we have some very active What Have You Been Reading threads that have some fantastic recommendations.
Yes.
And boy, oh boy, are people talking a ton and making tons of progress on our recommended reads list for the year. So honestly, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Check it out. Also, we've got our website, ircbpodcast.com. It's got a pronunciation guide. Probably at some point it'll have the guy whose name I botched from Incursion on there. We also have merch. We have stickers, we have shirts, all sorts of other things like that. It would be a great thing for you to go and take a look at. Also, I'd like to recommend that you go and rate and subscribe and tell your friends about our show. You can go ahead and do that over on iTunes. Also, just tell your friends about the show. Share it in whatever capacity you can.
It really helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have any comments, questions, jokes, or vegan chili recipes you'd like to share with the show and us, you can email us at ircb@destroythecybe.org. We've mentioned the Patreon on the show. It's patreon.com/IRCB podcast. You know what's over there. Exclusive audio, articles written by us, a bunch of other stuff. You can get stickers in the mail from Mike. He'll touch every sticker and mail it to you with a loving touch and a gaze before he puts it in the envelope.
I will do that.
Yeah.
Infinity Shred does all the music for our show. They are the best band in the universe. We can't thank them enough for letting us use their music. Xander is a true wizard. He's a great friend. He's just a fantastic person to know. He also edits the show. I want to say thank you to Paul and Nick for being on the episode. Thank you to everyone out there who interacts with us on the show, everyone who's super active on the Goodreads group. It's so fulfilling to watch people interact with our show and love it as much as we do. So thank you. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.